welcome to the 48th lecture on climate finance. Today, in this 10th week of third lecture, we are going to discuss about United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and particularly we will try to understand, we will try to discuss what are the adaptation and mitigation options as far as the finance is concerned under the framework of United Nations Framework on Climate Change, Convention on Climate Change called UNFCCC. So, to discuss this, we will go through the following points. The points are global climate governance under the UNFCCC framework, evolution of international climate agreements, climate finance architecture for supporting developing countries, major international climate funds and mechanisms, role of climate finance in mitigation, adaptation and climate building. Then we will also towards the end we will see how in the state of Andhra Pradesh in India a coastal resilience adaptation project has been implemented. So, let us see the right hand side. You can see the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and that has brought out this Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement, where important decisions with respect to clean development mechanism and also a kind of confirming to 1.5 or 2 degree centigrade temperature rise and 100 billion USD money from developed countries for utilization by the developing countries. This kind of mechanism has been evolved. So, from this Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement, the adaptation fund has been brought out. Now, the other financial mechanism as far as the UNFCCC is concerned are the Green Climate Fund. We have already discussed about this, and we have also discussed about the Global Environmental Facility. So, in terms of Green Climate Fund, what is utilized for adaptation and mitigation as far as climate change is concerned is utilized dominantly for that, whereas this JEF facility is utilized for climate including the environment. So, now under this JEF we have two, that is Special Climate Change Fund and also Least Developed Countries Fund. So, this has been discussed in Paris Agreement under UNFCCC, and this has been instituted under JEF to realize some special need as far as the climate is considered, and also for some funding to deal with the climate and environment as far as the least developed countries are concerned. So, UNFCCC established a framework for stabilizing greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere. Over time, two major international agreements strengthened the framework. Now, moving on to the left hand side diagram, as far as the Kyoto Protocol is concerned, we all know it has three verticals or three angles as far as the triangle is concerned. So, up we have a kind of market based mechanism which is linked with both developed nations target and also differentiation between countries, and in fact, these three all are linked to each other under the Kyoto Protocol framework. So, market based mechanism introduces mechanisms like carbon trading, joint implementation, and CDM, that stands for Clean Development Mechanism, to facilitate compliance. As far as the difference between the countries are concerned, it highlights the distinction between obligations for developed and developing nations. So, as far as the developed nations are concerned, it focuses on specific emission reduction targets set for the developed countries. So, it started means Kyoto Protocol 1997, one stock taking 2005, then 2012 is the first commitment period has been fixed. So, this is with respect to the financial mechanism under the broad financial mechanism architecture under UNFCCC and the Kyoto Protocol, which is also part of this. Now, moving on to the funding mechanisms under UNFCCC and Paris Agreement. So, with respect to Paris Agreement, we have moved means as all of us know, COP21, it happened in 2015 in Paris. So, accordingly, this is a very important COP meeting in 2015. Important decisions have been taken. So, means one of them is to how to restrict the temperature rise below 2 degree and must try to restrict by 1.5 degree centigrade by end of this century to 100. So, coming to the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement framework, you see let us first see on the right hand side in terms of the climate finance UNFCCC. As we already know, we have the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environmental Facility GEF we just discussed in the previous slide, and also the Adaptation Fund. And this also is available at every national and available to national and sub-national institutions who are party to this, and then they will utilize it in terms of public sector, private sector and projects and communities. So, the global response to climate change is coordinated primarily through the UNFCCC, an international treaty adopted in 1992 at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. All of us know that is how that is when the UNFCCC was born. So, UNFCCC mechanisms include the various funds under the GEF, that is Global Environmental Facility, and the Adaptation Fund. Now, we look at the left hand side connection diagram, where it talks about the financial flows for climate change, adaptation and mitigation as far as the developing countries are concerned. So, we have on top we have the government budgets, the capital market. Then you see on the next line up, along with UNFCCC, we have the development cooperation agencies, the bilateral financial institutions as we discussed, like JICA, the USAID. So, one country gives to another country in a bilateral mode. Other is multilateral financial institutions, and then we have private sector and also the domestic sector or domestic budgets. So, through this you can see the development cooperation agencies as a connectivity are linked to UNFCCC, and also the official development assistance, new and additional climate finance, and the UNFCCC along with the multilateral and bilateral financial institutions we gives rise to it along with the private sector give rise to the carbon markets. So, we have in the next level official development assistance, new and additional climate finance and carbon markets. Now, look at this. Out of this, what is emerging is industrialized countries, you say the ODA commitments, industrialized countries commitments to new and additional finance for climate change. On the other side, as far as the climate market is concerned, industrialized countries estimation emission reduction obligations and FDI, that is the foreign direct investment. So, CDM led by funding CDM levy funding the adaptation fund. So, this is a kind of total finance available for climate change, mitigation and adaptation in terms of initiatives under UNFCCC and Paris Agreement framework. So, now we will move on to understand the how UNFCCC all these things are implemented and what are the funding mechanisms available. So, to implement climate action in developing countries, several international climate finance mechanisms were established. These funds support adaptation, mitigation, technology transfer and capacity building. The following are the major funds and mechanisms operating under the UNFCCC framework. So, moving on, as far as adaptation fund is concerned, it was established in 2001 under Kyoto Protocol and became operational in 2007. The adaptation fund aims to reduce vulnerability to climate change, increase resilience of communities and ecosystems, it finances local community level adaptation measures. Coming to the types of projects that are funded under this adaptation fund, one is the mangrove restoration in coastal zones. So, we already discussed in some previous weeks in terms of the coastal protection by mangrove by restoring the mangroves. Then coming to the flood management, particularly in the urban sector. So, urban flood protection infrastructure, then the CRA, climate resilient agriculture, water resources management and early warning systems. So, funding sources, the fund is financed through multiple channels, that is share of proceeds from CDM projects, or something comes from the clean development mechanism projects, where all the annex and non-annex 1, annex 1 and non-annex 1 countries they participate. In terms of voluntary contributions or philanthropic contributions from developed voluntary contribution from developed countries and contributions also from the private sector. So, originally we remember that only 2% of the CER, certified emission reductions, that is generated by the CDM projects were allocated to the fund, but now this has increased and we discussed this under the adaptation fund. Now, moving on to the next is the Green Climate Fund called GCF. So, as far as the GCF or the Green Climate Fund is concerned, it is the largest global finance mechanism under the UNFCCC. It was established in 2010 at COP16 in Cancun, and the fund supports both reduction in terms of greenhouse gas emission that we discussed under mitigation, adapting to climate change impacts, that is adaptation, and adaptation projects in developing countries. So, GCF uses several financial tools in terms of in terms of concessional loans, equity investments, guarantees and result based payments. So, what are the examples? As we know, solar energy expansion in Africa has been largely benefited from this Green Climate Fund initiative. The climate resilient agriculture in Asia, including India, is largely benefited from this, and also the flood protection system in coastal regions and urban climate resilient infrastructure. In some previous lectures we have discussed about the climate resilient infrastructure. So, it is a kind of grey green infrastructure mosaic or grey green mosaic infrastructure within the urban setup, so that we take the advantage of having more of the green and the blue spaces occupied by vegetation and the water bodies, so that we minimize we optimize all these things, thereby contributing towards the betterment of climate change. So, these are some of the example projects that have been financed under the GCF, that is the Green Climate Fund. The mitigation areas, yes, in terms of renewable energy sector, increasing energy efficiency, low emission transport and forest and land use management. So, in these areas also the Green Climate Fund is available for execution. So, the adaptation areas like health and food security, water resources, and in terms of forest and land use management and others, it also contributes to ecosystem resilience and infrastructure resilience. So, these are the various adaptation areas where Green Climate Fund or GCF is utilized. So, a symbol in terms of the GCF is given on the upper right part of this particular slide. Moving on to Global Environmental Facility called GEF. So, in terms of GEF, the which is also an initiative in terms of in our planet to fund or to come out with funding mechanism in the broad sector of environment, including the climate, all of us know. So, key funding programs: least developed countries fund LDCF. So, the LDCF supports preparation and implementation of NAPs, that means National Adaptation Programs of Action. So, the countries which are signatory to this UNFCCC, they come out with their National Adaptation Program of Actions called NAPAs, and this is supported and this least developed countries fund supports in terms of preparing and implementing, more importantly implementing the commitments of national adaptation programs of action, in particularly in least developed countries. Coming to the second one is the Special Climate Change Fund, SCCF. This support adaptation and technology transfer. So, whatever technology have been generated, have been invented or discovered or newly framed, that also need to be transferred to the other countries other than its place of origin or other than the origin country. So, the GEF, that means Global Environment Facility, was established in 1991 as a financial mechanism to support global environmental protection. An official financial mechanism of the UNFCCC, as all of us know, in 1994 it was officialized or institutionalized. The GEF finance, particularly the Global Environmental Facility, it finances projects related to more or less similar projects, but it is in a broader domain of environment. Look at this: climate change mitigation, biodiversity conservation, which is otherwise not funded under many other previously discussed adaptation or the GCFs. So, in terms of the chemical and waste management, sustainable forest management, land degradation and international water. So, these are some of the projects which have been financed under the Global Environmental Facility. So, many of them indirectly complies to our climate. So, in terms of this, we have the GEF that operates in terms of various actions and involving agencies: UNEP, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and UNIDO, IUON, CAF, FFCO. So, the list is there. So, it has a scientific and technical advisory panel, STAP, and the GEF assembly. The GEF council countries are the council members that it constitutes, and many of these conventions that are linked are initiated by GEF are CBDs, Conventional Biological Diversity, UNFCCC, also Stockholm Conference and UNCCD in terms of combating climate change and desertification, and Montreal Protocol, all of us know, deals with ozone, and Minemalia Concession. So, these all are under the framework of GEF within in the broader umbrella of UNFCCC. So, in terms of the fourth one is the CDM. As we have already discussed in past, these projects, the CDM is a market based mechanism under the Kyoto Protocol. It allows developed countries to invest in emission reduction projects in developing countries. So, from this diagram you can see you have Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 countries and up and down linked to CDM. So, Annex 1 are mostly the developed countries with legally binding emissions reduction targets, whereas the non-Annex 1 countries are developing countries without legally binding emission reduction targets. So, as far as the left and right is concerned, the connectivity is in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction projects and carbon sink projects. So, these projects generate CERs, we call them certified emission reduction. So, as we know, 1 CER is equivalent to reduction of 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. So, when we talk about CO2 equivalent, we know that we also talk about other greenhouse gases with respect to their global warming potential, that is also abbreviated as GWP. So, the CDM concept, carbon credit, greenhouse gas emission rights, finance, technology, capacity building support, and this side we have industrialized countries, greenhouse gas emissions, developing projects, particularly project activity and emission projects. Look at this, the CDM traded in international in terms of the CRs and which is generated out of the CDM projects. They are traded in international carbon markets used by developed countries to meet the emission reduction targets. So, in totality, the CDM projects allow entities in Annex 1 countries that have ratified the Kyoto Protocol to invest in the projects that reduce greenhouse gases in non-Annex 1 countries while contributing to sustainable development. So, this is what has been taken from UNFCCC CDM modalities and procedures by Marrakesh Accords in 2001. The citation has been listed towards end. So, coming to the eligible criteria as far as the CDM projects are concerned, CDM projects produce CER, certified emission reduction credits. These are generated from the greenhouse gas emission reduction from our. So, whatever emissions we reduce, or we call it emission reduction from various activities, that is actually and these emissions avoiding the projects in non-Annex 1 countries. So, you see, in terms of the linkage, the CDM projects, we have the certified emission reductions that leads to sustainable development in developing countries. So, investors can sell the certified emission reduction, this is a credit to other investors or countries to comply with the Kyoto Protocol commitments. As far as the investors are considered, they can use the CERs to comply with domestic Kyoto Protocol regulations. So, CER can be withdrawn and no longer used or transferred. So, countries pursuing greenhouse gases reduction to do so where they can be reduced at lower cost. So, in terms of a CDM or clean development project appraisal mechanism is concerned, CDM project selection, CDM project participation, CDM project verification, and then CDM project final issues. So, with this we understand that countries pursuing the greenhouse gas reduction to do so where they can be reduced at lower cost. So, this is how the CER can be withdrawn and no longer used or transferred. So, moving on with respect to the fund for responding to loss and damage, we put it under FRLD. So, we have another funding mechanism for responding specifically for loss and damage, we call LND. It is a newly established climate finance mechanism. It was created during COP27 in Egypt, Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt negotiations. So, what it is? So, there we know because of climate change a lot of climate induced extreme weather events or disasters, there are a lot of loss or damage to life and property. So, loss and damage refers to climate impacts that cannot be avoided through mitigation or adaptation. Example include permanent land loss due to sea level rise, destruction from extreme weather events, loss of livelihood, ecosystem collapse. So, these are some of the examples. So, when you lose because of permanent land loss due to sea level rise, destruction due to extreme weather events such as cyclones or lightning or many other things, and loss of livelihood for flood and other things induced because of the climate change or snow and glacier melting, or what you say irregular pattern of rainfall, and ecosystem collapse. So forest fire, dam, and also earthquake, all these fall under these categories. So purpose of the fund, this fund aims to provide financial support to countries suffering irreversible climate impact. So that means it is utilized for disaster recovery, reconstruction, and compensation for the climate related damages. In terms of UNFCCC, fund for responding to loss and damage, as we have been discussing, you see in terms of the potential and application of loss and damage fund on the upper right hand pie diagram, it is applied to many areas including energy sector, transport sector, security and migration, infrastructure, water resources, and also it is applicable to justice and human rights sector. Look at this some AI enabled graphics on the left hand side, which talks about funding in terms of loss and damage. So loss and damage by numbers. So average annual estimated cost of loss and damage to developing countries by 2030, that means by end of this decade, could be to the tune of 435 billions. So that is what average annual estimation. Look at on the right hand side, 525 billion estimated cumulative climate linked losses of 55 vulnerable countries in last 2 decades. So what has already happened, that 525 billions in last 2 decades. So this is what is already a kind of estimation and what has been realized. And moving on to there is a kind of annual estimation cost of loss and damage to developing countries by 2050 could be to the tune of 1 trillion USD, and by 300 million US dollar has been pledged so far by high income countries outside of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So that means so less has been committed or pledged, but the requirement is very high, 1 trillion USD in a kind of annual estimated cost of loss and damage to developing countries by 2050. So towards a mosaic of funds for addressing loss and damage, you can see in terms of what we have under UNFCCC, the ideas of a dedicated L&D funding mechanism, and in terms of the funders, the sources, various sources have been listed like Scotland and Denmark, Belgium, and many other countries, and what is the amount they have pledged or committed, and managed by which funding agencies or houses as far as that particular country linkage is concerned, or international available in the international sphere, and also allocated for which purpose. Like let us say the Scotland is allocating 8.5 or pledged to allocate 8.5 million USD, and it will be managed by the Climate Justice Fund of Scotland, and is allocated for climate vulnerable countries research and communication activities. So similarly, a kind of case study we want to discuss, though similar kind of studies we have already discussed in terms of coastal protection. So 689 to 64, this is the total quantity in terms of USD has been budgeted and executed by MS Swaminathan Research Foundation. The project name is Conservation and Management of Coastal Resources as a Potential Adaptation Strategy for Sea Level Rise. So this particular diagram explains that how the adaptation fund is utilized in terms of mangrove restoration, integrated mangrove fishery farming system, and also the impact has been realized. The impact is ecological defense, or this gives a bioshield economic resilience in terms of increment in terms of the livelihood and food, and the capacity building. Hundreds of local members, they understand in terms of mangrove restoration, the canal digging, seed storage, and also sustainable farming. So, to discuss about this particular lecture, we have taken help of these citations or the references. To if you want to read more, you can look at. So, to conclude, we discussed these points, the following points. Institutions such as Adaptation Fund, Global Climate, Green Climate Fund, and Global Environment Facility provide financial and technical support for mitigation and adaptation initiatives. Emerging initiatives such as the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage (FRLD) highlight growing global recognition of irreversible climate impacts. The third is resilience through action, as also we discussed previously. Nature-based solutions and community-led projects such as this coastal conservation efforts serve as vital model for building long-term ecological and economic resilience against climate threats. Strengthening global cooperation and scaling up climate finance are essential to achieve the Paris Agreement goals and sustainable development pathways. So, with this we conclude this lecture, the third lecture of this week, that talks about various finance and funding mechanism towards adaptation and mitigation under the UNFCCC framework. Thank you very much.